The other Sarah, Sarah Jenkins, stood in her bedroom in Austin, Texas. Her closet was so full that the door wouldn't stay shut. She had spent the last hour pulling things out and piling them on her bed. She picked up a bright yellow dress with the price tag still on it. She had bought it 6 months ago. She remembered that day. She had been feeling stressed at work and felt like she needed a win. She saw the dress in a window and thought, that is the kind of dress a girl who goes to brunch on Sundays wears. That is the kind of girl who is happy and has her life together. Sarah bought the dress, but she never went to that brunch. She never became that girl. As she looked at the pile on her bed, she saw 3 more dresses with tags. She saw a pair of expensive hiking boots she had never worn. She saw a fancy camera she didn't know how to use. "I didn't buy these clothes," she whispered to her dog, Cooper. "I bought the idea of a different me." This was Sarah's aha moment. She realized she had been spending thousands of dollars on a version of herself that didn't exist. She was trying to buy a personality. She thought that if she owned the right stuff, she would magically become the person she wanted to be. But the hiking boots didn't make her a hiker, and the yellow dress didn't make her stress go away. They just took up space in her closet and left a hole in her bank account. Sarah was a victim of the social pressure hole in the bucket. She was looking at people on social media who seemed to have perfect lives. They had the right clothes, the right coffee, and the right vacations. She felt like she was falling behind. Every time she bought something, she was trying to catch up to a ghost. Manufacturing our desires, it is important to know that you aren't just fighting your own brain. You are also fighting a massive industry designed to make you feel not enough. In 1939, the World's Fair was held in New York. It was a massive event meant to show people what the future would look like. Before this time, most ads were very simple. If a company sold soap, the ad would say, "This soap gets you clean." If they sold a car, they said, "This car gets you from point A to point B." But a man named Edward Bernays changed everything. Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, the famous doctor who studied how the mind works. Bernays realized that you could sell much more stuff if you stopped talking about what a product does and started talking about how it makes you feel. At the World's Fair, and in the years that followed, marketing shifted. They stopped selling tools and started selling dreams. They linked products to our deepest fears and hopes. They didn't sell a car, they sold freedom and status. They didn't sell a cigarette, they sold independence. They didn't sell a vacuum cleaner, they sold the love of a good mother. This changed the way we think about needs. A need used to be something you had to have to stay alive, like food, water, and a roof. But today, we feel like we need the latest iPhone or a specific brand of water bottle. We have been trained to believe that our value as humans is tied to what we buy. If you feel like you are always wanting more, it isn't because there is something wrong with you. It is because you are living in a world that is constantly whispering, "You aren't good enough yet, but this product will fix it." The view from above Marcus Aurelius had a trick for dealing with this. He called it the view from above. When he felt himself getting too attached to his riches or feeling upset about a small problem, he would imagine himself floating high above the earth. From that height, he would look down at the city of Rome. He would see the tiny people scurrying around like ants. He would see that his massive palace was just a speck of dust. He would see that the things people were fighting over, gold, land, fancy clothes, were tiny and unimportant in the grand scheme of time. This technique helps us shrink our cravings. When you are in a store looking at a $100 candle, it feels huge. It feels like the most important thing in the world. But if you step back, if you take the view from above, you realize it's just a jar of wax that will eventually be thrown away. It won't change your life. It won't make you a better person. It's just stuff. We can also use this to look at social pressure. When we feel like we need to buy a new car because our neighbor got one, we can zoom out. In 50 years, both of those cars will be in a junkyard. They will be piles of rusted metal. The status they gave us will be gone. Why waste our hard-earned freedom on something so temporary? Why we buy the real list? If we want to stop the leaks in our bucket, we have to be honest about why we are pulling out our credit cards. Most of the time, it falls into one of these buckets: stress relief. We had a bad day, and buying something gives us a quick hit of joy. This is often called retail therapy, but it's more like a drug. The high wears off and the stress is still there, plus a new bill. The future me trap. Like Sarah, we buy things for the person we wish we were, rather than the person we actually are. The comparison game, we buy things so we don't feel less than our friends or the people we see online. Boredom, shopping has become a hobby. When we have nothing to do, we scroll through stores on our phones. The die-drought spiral. We bought one nice thing, and now we feel like we have to upgrade everything else to match it. When you can name the reason you are buying something, the itch starts to lose its power. You can look at that item and say, I'm not buying this because I need it. I'm buying it because I'm bored. Once you say that out loud, it's a lot easier to put the item back on the shelf. Breaking the cycle, the goal of frugality isn't to be cheap. It isn't about suffering or never having anything nice. It is about intentionality. It is about making sure that your money, which is actually just your life energy in paper form, goes toward things that truly matter. Every time you spend $20, you are spending a portion of your life. You had to work for that money. You had to give up your time, your thoughts, and your energy to earn it. When you spend it on something you don't need, you are essentially throwing away a piece of your life. Being a sovereign saver means you are in charge. You don't let a buy now button tell you what to do. You don't let a scarlet robe tell you that your desk is ugly. You don't let an emperor's palace tell you that you need silk to be happy. You realize that the most valuable thing you can own isn't a product. It is your own time. It is the peace of mind that comes from knowing you don't owe anyone anything. It is the freedom to say no to a job you hate because you have a reservoir of savings instead of a closet full of clothes you don't wear. The 48-hour rule. So, how do we start? How do we stop the itch from turning into a purchase? The best way to break the habit of buying things you don't need is to build a buffer between the thought and the action. We need to let the dopamine hit wear off so our logical brain can take over. Your task for today is to start the 48-hour rule. From now on, if you see something you want that isn't a basic need, like groceries or medicine, you cannot buy it right away. You must wait exactly 48 hours. Write it down on a piece of paper or put it in a note on your phone. Write the name of the item, the price, and the time you saw it. Then, walk away. During those 48 hours, something amazing will happen. The must-have feeling will start to fade. You will realize that you lived perfectly fine without that item for your entire life up until 2 days ago. Most of the time, after 48 hours, you will look at that note and realize you don't even want the item anymore. You just saved yourself money, space, and a little bit of your life energy. If you still truly believe you need it after 2 days, then you can talk about it in your budget. But more often than not, you'll find that the need was just a ghost, and by waiting, you've chased it away. Chapter 3: Mastering the Art of Budgeting. The wooden boards of the Berkshire creaked as the ship tilted wildly to one side. It was 1726, and a young man named Benjamin Franklin was stuck in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. He was 20 years old, and for a few terrifying moments, he was certain he was going to die. A massive storm had trapped the ship. Huge waves crashed over the deck, and the wind screamed through the ropes. Franklin watched as the sailors struggled to keep the boat from breaking apart. He realized that if the ship sank, he would leave behind nothing but a messy pile of debts and a reputation for being a talented but unfocused kid. He survived the storm, but the near miss changed him forever. As the sea calmed down, Franklin sat on the deck and took a hard look at his life. He realized he had been drifting. He had no plan, no rules, and no way to track if he was becoming the man he wanted to be. He decided right then that he would never live another day without a map. He took out his journal and wrote a plan for future conduct. This wasn't just a list of dreams, it was the first version of a life budget. He decided that if he wanted to be successful, he had to stop guessing and start measuring. The virtue ledger. When Franklin got back to Philadelphia, he didn't just hope to be a better person. He knew that hope was not a plan. He decided to treat his own character like a business. He picked 13 virtues he wanted to master. These were things like being clean, being quiet, and most importantly, being frugal. He knew that being frugal meant spending less than he earned, so he could use the extra money to build his printing business. He didn't try to fix everything at once. He knew that was a recipe for failure. Instead, he made a small book with a page for every virtue. He drew a grid with 7 columns for the days of the week. Every night, he would sit down and put a little black spot on the grid every time he failed one of his goals. Frugality was the one he struggled with the most. Back then, Franklin loved the prestige of owning new things. He liked the smell of fresh leather-bound books and the look of expensive printing equipment. He often felt the urge to buy things he didn't really need just to feel like he was making it. But every time he bought something unnecessary, he had to put a black mark in his book. Seeing those marks on the paper was painful. It forced him to admit that he was leaking his potential. He treated his character like a balance sheet. He realized that a fault in his behavior was exactly like a debt in a bank account. By recording his failures, he eventually learned how to avoid them. He practiced this ledger system for years. He eventually became so disciplined that he was able to retire at the age of 42. He didn't get lucky. He simply stopped guessing where his time and money were going. He gave every hour and every penny a job to do. Sarah's midnight audit nearly 300 years later, Sarah Jenkins sat at her kitchen table in Austin, Texas. It was midnight, and the only sound in the apartment was the quiet snoring of her dog, Cooper. Sarah wasn't facing a storm at sea, but she felt like she was drowning. She had just finished looking at her bank statement from the last 90 days. For months, Sarah had told herself that she was doing okay. She had a good job and a fancy title. But as she looked at the numbers, the truth came out. She wasn't just spending a little too much. She was losing money through dozens of tiny holes she hadn't even noticed. She took a red pen and started circling every expense that wasn't a need. A $15 subscription for a gym she hadn't visited in 4 months. 3 different streaming services that all showed the same movies. A $25 convenience fee for a food delivery that took 2 hours to arrive. 5 different $5 charges for extra lives in a game on her phone. By the time she reached the bottom of the page, her heart was racing. In the last month alone, she had spent $450 on what she called miscellaneous. That was nearly $5,500 a year. That was enough money to pay off one of her credit cards entirely. That was enough money to take a real vacation instead of just buying stuff to feel better about her stress. Sarah looked at the red circles on her statement. They looked exactly like the black spots in Benjamin Franklin's virtue ledger. She realized that her promotion raise from 6 months ago hadn't been eaten by inflation or high rent. It had been eaten by her own lack of a plan. She was a financial drifter, just like young Ben Franklin on the Berkshire. She was waiting for a storm to sink her before she decided to grab the steering wheel. The art of giving every dollar a job. Most people think a budget is a way to stop yourself from having fun. They see it as a money diet that forces them to eat cabbage and sit in the dark. But that is the wrong way to look at it. A budget is actually a tool for freedom. It is a way to make sure your money goes to the things you actually care about, instead of leaking away into things you'll forget by tomorrow. The most effective way to do this is a method called zero-based budgeting. The goal is simple. Your income minus your expenses should equal 0 every single month. This doesn't mean you have $0 in your bank account. It means that every single dollar has a specific job before the month even starts. Think of your money like a group of small soldiers. If you just let them wander around the woods, they will get lost or captured. But if you give every soldier a specific post to guard, they will keep you safe. In a zero-based budget, you assign your soldiers to different posts. 1, the essentials, rent, electricity, and groceries. 2, the future, savings and debt payments. 3, the fun, dining out, hobbies, and movies. When you do this, you stop asking, "Can I afford this?" and start asking, "Does this fit the plan?" If you have $50 set aside for dining out and you spend it all by the second week of the month, the answer is no. You aren't saying you can't have fun. You're saying you already had the fun you planned for. The 50-30-20 framework, if the idea of tracking every single penny feels too big right now, you can start with a simpler map. This is called the 50-30-20 rule. It is a great way to see if your leaking bucket has a giant hole in it or just a few small drips. 50% for needs. Half of your take-home pay should cover the things you must have to survive. This includes your housing, utilities, basic groceries, and transportation to work. If your needs are taking up 70% of your income, you don't have a spending problem. You have a housing or lifestyle problem. You might be living in a bucket that is too expensive for your water supply. 30% for wants. This is the fun category. It includes things like Netflix, dinners with friends, that new pair of shoes, or your favorite hobby. This is usually where the biggest leaks happen. 20% for financial goals. This is the most important part of the budget. This money is for paying off debt and building your compound garden. This is the money that will eventually grow into your freedom number. When Sarah applied this rule to her own life, she realized her wants were actually taking up 45% of her income, while her financial goals were only getting about 2%. No wonder she felt like she was drowning. She was spending all her seeds on things that didn't grow, leaving nothing to plant for her future. The envelope system in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, people didn't have apps or spreadsheets. They had to be much more clever. Many families used what is now called the envelope system. Imagine you have a stack of paper envelopes on your kitchen counter. At the start of the month, you put cash into each one. One is labeled rent, one is groceries, and one is entertainment. When you go to the store, you take money out of the groceries envelope. If you go to pay and the envelope is empty, you stop buying food. You don't borrow from the rent envelope. You simply wait until next month. This system is powerful because it uses physical friction. Swiping a credit card is easy because it doesn't feel like you are losing anything. It's just a piece of plastic. But watching an envelope get empty is a physical sensation. It forces your brain to realize that money is a limited resource. Even if you don't use physical cash today, you can use digital envelopes. Many modern banks let you create different buckets or sub-accounts. You can name them car repair, dog emergency, or holiday gifts. By moving money into these buckets as soon as you get paid, you are hiding the money from your own impulse to spend it. You are sealing the leaks before they even start. Aging your money, one of the biggest breakthroughs in modern budgeting, was popularized by a man named Jesse Meckham. He noticed that most people live on last week's paycheck. They get paid on Friday and use that money to pay the bills that were due on Thursday. This is a high-stress way to live. It's like running a race where the finish line is always moving away from you. The goal should be to age your money. This means you want to get to a point where you are spending money you earned at least 30 days ago. Imagine how much lower your stress would be if all of your bills for June were already paid for with money you earned in May. When you age your money, the leaking bucket stops being a crisis. If a small hole appears like a flat tire or a broken toaster, it doesn't sink the whole ship. You have a buffer of time. You aren't reacting to the storm, you are watching it from the safety of the shore. Sarah's first small win, a few days after her midnight audit, Sarah was walking to work in downtown Austin. She passed her favorite coffee shop. The smell of roasted beans and sugar wafted out the door. Usually, she would walk in without thinking and spend $12 on a large latte and a lemon poppy seed muffin. She felt the old urge. She felt stressed about a meeting, and her brain told her that a treat would make her feel better. But then, she remembered Benjamin Franklin. She remembered the water American who drank water while his coworkers spent their wages on beer. She thought about the $450 miscellaneous hole she had circled in red. She stopped at the door. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She looked at her new budget app. She had assigned exactly $40 for coffee and treats for the whole month. She had already spent $32. If she bought this $12 breakfast, she would be over budget by the first week of the month. She took a deep breath. "Not today," she whispered to herself. She walked past the shop and went to the office break room. She poured herself a cup of plain, free office coffee. It didn't taste as good as the fancy latte, but as she took a sip, she felt something much better than a sugar rush. She felt power. For the first time in years, she had looked at a temptation and said no because she had a bigger yes waiting for her in the future. She opened her budget app and marked a small win. It was her first clear day on her own virtue ledger. She realized that frugality wasn't about being cheap. It was about being the boss of her own life. The map to sovereignty, mastering the art of budgeting, is not about learning complex math. It is about learning how to be honest with yourself. Most people fail with money because they refuse to look at the red circles. They would rather live in a fog of "I'm doing okay" than face the reality of their spending. But once you shine a light on the leaks, they lose their power over you. A budget is simply a map that shows you where you are and where you want to go. Without it, you are just a passenger on a ship driven by the wind and the waves. With it, you are the captain. Imagine a life where you never wonder if you can afford the rent. You see an emergency as a minor inconvenience because the money is already there. You buy things because they add value to your life, not because you are bored or stressed. You watch your compound garden grow every month because you are finally planting your seeds instead of eating them. This is what Benjamin Franklin realized on the deck of the Berkshire. He realized that a life without a plan is a life at the mercy of the storm. By creating his ledger, he built a financial fortress that allowed him to spend the rest of his life doing exactly what he loved: inventing, writing, and helping his country. You don't need a printing press or a fancy degree to do this. You just need a piece of paper, a pen, and the courage to look at your miscellaneous spending. Every dollar you save from a leak is a dollar that can work for you. Every time you say no to a small want, you are saying yes to a big freedom. The storm may be loud and the waves may be high, but you have the map. It is time to stop drifting and start steering. The sovereign saver isn't someone who never spends money. It is someone who knows exactly why they are spending it and exactly where it will take them. Your freedom number is waiting for you at the end of that map. All you have to do is take the first step and give your next dollar a job. Chapter 4: 5 Pillars of Frugal Mastery. When Hetty Green died in 1916, she was the richest woman in the world. She left behind a fortune worth about $100 million. In today's money, that is more than $2 billion. The newspapers called her the Witch of Wall Street. They wrote stories about her old black dress and how she lived in cheap apartments. People expected to find a woman who was miserable and mean. What they actually found was the most successful investor of her time. She was not a witch. She was a master of a skill most people have forgotten. She knew exactly where her money went, and she refused to let a single penny escape unless it was going to work for her. She did not become a billionaire by making lucky guesses on the stock market. She became a billionaire because she mastered the 5 pillars of living on less. She knew that wealth is not built by what you earn. It is built by what you keep. The office on the floor in the late 1800s, if you were a powerful person in New York City, you had a fancy office. You had mahogany desks, silk curtains, and a team of workers to bring you tea. These offices cost a lot of money to rent. They cost even more money to keep up. Hetty Green looked at those offices and saw a giant hole in a bucket. She saw a waste of capital that could be used to buy more stocks or more land. Instead of renting a building, Hetty walked into the chemical bank in New York. She was a major shareholder, which meant she owned part of the bank. She told them she needed a place to work. She didn't ask for a desk. She didn't ask for a private room. She simply sat down on the floor in the lobby. She spread her papers and ledgers all around her. This was her office. The other bankers laughed at her. They wore expensive suits and sat in their gilded rooms. They thought Hetty was cheap. But while they were paying thousands of dollars in rent, Hetty was using that same money to buy their debts. When the markets crashed and those same bankers lost everything, they had to come to Hetty for help. She was sitting on the floor with millions of dollars in cash because she refused to pay for a view she didn't need. This is the core of frugal mastery. It is not about being cheap. Being cheap is about spending as little as possible on everything, even if the quality is bad. Being frugal is about being a good manager of your resources. It is about cutting the cost of things that don't matter so you can have more than enough for the things that do. Pillar 1, the roof over your head housing, is usually the biggest hole in anyone's bucket. Most people spend nearly half of their paycheck just to have a place to sleep. We are told that a bigger house is a sign of success. We are told that we deserve a spare bedroom or a fancy kitchen. But every extra square foot of a house comes with a cost. You have to heat it. You have to cool it. You have to fill it with furniture. You have to pay taxes on it. The trouble starts when we buy a house or rent an apartment based on the maximum amount the bank says we can afford. If a bank says you can afford $2,000 a month, most people go out and find a place for $1,999. They leave themselves no room for error. When the water heater breaks or the rent goes up, they fall into a panic. Frugal masters look at housing differently. They look for the minimum viable space. They ask themselves how much room they actually use every day. Most people spend 90% of their time in the kitchen, the bedroom, and the living room. Yet, they pay for dining rooms they only use twice a year. The tiny house movement is a modern version of Hetty Green's office. People are choosing to live in 300 square feet instead of 3,000. They aren't doing it because they are poor. Many of them are quite wealthy. They do it because they realize that a smaller house means a smaller bill. A smaller bill means they can stop working 10 years earlier. They trade a guest room they don't need for a decade of freedom. Pillar 2. The transportation trap. Sarah Jenkins stood in the middle of a car dealership in Austin, Texas. The sun was hot, and the smell of new tires was in the air. Her old car was fine, but the lease was ending. She had been looking at a shiny, blue SUV. It had heated seats, a sunroof, and a screen on the dashboard that looked like a television. The salesman smiled at her. He told her she looked great in the driver's seat. "It's only $600 a month," he said. "For a woman with your job, that's nothing. You worked hard for this. You deserve to drive something that shows how well you're doing." Sarah felt the pull. She thought about her friends seeing her in this car. She thought about how easy it would be to just sign the papers and drive away. But then she remembered the story of Hetty Green. She thought about the compound garden. If she took that $600 and put it into the car, those seeds would be gone forever. In 5 years, the car would be worth half of what she paid for it. But if she took that $600 and put it into her savings, those seeds would grow. In 20 years, that $600 a month could turn into hundreds of thousands of dollars. She looked at the salesman and felt a sudden wave of clarity. She didn't need the blue SUV to be happy. She needed the freedom that the money would buy her. She walked away from the SUV and bought a used silver sedan for cash. It wasn't flashy. It didn't have a sunroof, but it was reliable and it was hers. For the first time in years, she didn't have a car payment. She felt like she had just given herself a $600 a month raise. Transportation is a trap because cars are depreciating assets. That is a fancy way of saying they lose value every time you turn the key. A $40,000 car might be worth $20,000 in just a few years. When you borrow money to buy a car, you're paying interest on something that is losing value. It is like pouring water into a bucket that is designed to leak. Pillar 3. The food frontier. In the 1970s, the price of food started to climb very fast. Families were struggling to keep up with the cost of groceries. This gave birth to the brown bag movement. It wasn't a formal club, but a shift in how people thought about lunch. Instead of going to a diner or a cafe every day, people started bringing their own food from home in simple brown paper bags. It seems like a small thing. A sandwich and an apple don't feel like a fortune. But if you spend $15 on lunch every workday, that is $75 a week. That is $300 a month. Over a year, that is $3,600 spent on lunches that you likely didn't even enjoy that much. You were probably eating them at your desk while checking emails. The food pillar is where most people lose the most money without realizing it. We live in a world of convenience spending. We pay someone else to cook our food, wrap it up, and drive it to our door. We pay $25 for a pizza that cost $3 to make. We pay $7 for a coffee that we could make at home for 20 cents. Troubleshooting your food budget isn't about eating ramen noodles every night. It is about value-based spending. This means you spend money where it actually makes you happy and cut it where it doesn't. If you love a fancy dinner with friends once a month, keep doing it. But if you are spending $10 a day on a mediocre deli sandwich just because you forgot to pack a lunch, that is a leak. The key to mastering this pillar is planning. Most people spend too much on food because they make decisions when they are hungry. When you are hungry, you don't care about your budget. You care about a burger. Frugal masters decide what they will eat on Sunday before the week even starts. They buy their groceries with a list and stay away from the aisles that try to tempt them with snacks. Pillar 4. The invisible leaks, utilities. Most people think of their utility bills, electricity, water, and heat, as fixed costs. They think there is nothing they can do about them. But these are some of the easiest leaks to plug. Think about your home as a living thing. It breathes air in through small cracks in the windows and doors. In the winter, your heater works overtime to warm up that cold air. In the summer, your air conditioner works to cool down the hot air. By spending $20 on some simple weather stripping to seal those cracks, you might save $200 over the course of a year. Small habits add up in the utility pillar. Turning the lights off when you leave a room, taking shorter showers, and adjusting the thermostat by just 2 degrees can save a significant amount of money over time. These aren't sacrifices, they are optimizations. Hetty Green famously heated her oatmeal on the radiator in her room. She didn't want to pay for a stove or the fuel to run it. While that might be an extreme example, the logic is sound. Why pay for energy you aren't using? If you are at work all day, why is your house being kept at a perfect 70 degrees? You are essentially paying to keep your furniture comfortable. Pillar 5. The subscription ghost. The fifth pillar is a modern problem that Hetty Green never had to face. It is the subscription ghost. Today, almost everything is a subscription. We subscribe to movies, music, gym memberships, apps, and even boxes of snacks that show up at our door. The danger of a subscription is that it is passive spending. Once you sign up, the money leaves your account every month whether you use the service or not. A $10 a month app feels like nothing, but most people have 5 or 6 of these ghosts haunting their bank accounts. When Sarah Jenkins did her deep audit, she found she was paying for a gym she hadn't visited in 4 months. She was paying for a streaming service she only used to watch one show 2 years ago. She was even paying for a premium version of a weather app. When she added them all up, she was spending $110 a month on things she didn't use. Troubleshooting this pillar requires a scorched earth approach. Cancel everything. If you find that you truly miss a service, you can always sign back up. but you will likely find that you don't even notice most of them are gone. The trouble with being normal. The biggest obstacle to mastering these 5 pillars isn't math. It is other people. When you start living frugally, people will notice. When you bring your lunch to work, your coworkers might ask if you are doing okay. When you drive an older car, your neighbors might think you had a setback. Society tells us that spending money is how we show our value. If you don't spend money, people assume you don't have it. This is the comparison trap. It is a race where the only way to win is to spend more than everyone else, which means you end up with less than everyone else. Hetty Green was mocked every day. The newspapers called her raggedy and crazy. But she didn't care. She knew that the people laughing at her were often one bad month away from being broke. She had the sovereignty mindset. She didn't need a fancy dress to feel powerful. She felt powerful because she owned the buildings those people worked in. If you want to be a master of frugality, you have to be okay with not being normal. Normal people are stressed about their bills. Normal people have no savings. Normal people are stuck in jobs they hate because they have a car payment and a mortgage that is too high. Building your fortress when you master these 5 pillars, something strange happens to your brain. Your stress levels start to drop. When Sarah Jenkins decided to buy the used car and cancel her subscriptions, her outflow dropped by over $700 a month. That $700 was no longer leaking out of her bucket. It stayed in the bucket. For the first time, the water level started to rise. A few weeks later, Sarah's dog, Cooper, got sick. He needed an emergency visit to the vet. In the past, this would have been a disaster. Sarah would have cried. She would have put the $800 bill on a credit card and worried about how to pay it off for the next 6 months. She would have felt like a failure. But this time, Sarah didn't panic. She looked at her bank account. Because she had plugged the leaks in her housing, transportation, and food, she had the money sitting right there. She paid the vet, took Cooper home, and went to sleep. That is the true power of frugality. It isn't about the money. It is about the peace. It is about building a financial fortress that protects you from the storms of life. When you don't owe anyone anything and your expenses are low, you are the boss of your own life. The unexpected connection, mastering the 5 pillars of frugality, changes how you see the world. You start to realize that everything has a life cost. When you look at a $50 dinner, you don't just see $50. You see 2 or 3 hours of your life that you had to trade to earn that money. This realization leads to a deeper truth. Frugality isn't just about managing your money, it is about managing your time. The less money you need to live, the less time you have to spend working for someone else. This connection between money and time is what Benjamin Franklin called the junto of life. He realized that by being frugal, he could buy his own time. He retired at age 42, not because he was the richest man in America, but because he had the lowest expenses relative to his wealth. He spent the rest of his life doing science, writing, and helping to start a new country. By plugging the holes in your bucket today, you aren't just saving pennies. You are buying your future hours. You are making sure that one day, you won't have to trade your time for a paycheck. You will be able to spend your time on the things that truly matter. But before you can grow that compound garden of wealth, you have to deal with the ghosts of the past. You have to face the debt that is already pulling at your pockets. It is time to look at how to roll a snowball that can crush even the biggest mountain of debt. Chapter 5: The Day the Debt Snowball Roll. In 1837, a man named Silas stood on a street corner in New York City, clutching a piece of paper that was suddenly worth nothing. Just a few months earlier, Silas felt like a king. He owned a small shop that sold fine fabrics and tea. He had used credit to fill his shelves, believing that the boom times would never end. Everyone was doing it. Banks were handing out loans like candy, and people were buying land out west with money that didn't really exist. Then, the world broke. The president had ordered that land could only be bought with gold or silver. Suddenly, the paper money Silas held in his hand was just colorful trash. The banks closed their doors. The people who owed Silas money couldn't pay him, which meant Silas couldn't pay the people he owed. He wasn't just broke, he was buried. Silas was an unlikely person to find himself in this mess. He was a hard worker who never missed a day at his shop. He wasn't a gambler or a lazy man. But he had fallen into a trap that has existed as long as money itself. He had mistaken easy credit for real wealth. Now, he faced a terror that we can hardly imagine today: the debtor's prison. In the early 1800s, if you couldn't pay your bills, the law didn't care why. They would lock you in a cold, crowded room until your family found a way to pay the debt. The shame was worse than the hunger. Silas felt like a failure. Every time he saw his reflection in a shop window, he didn't see a businessman. He saw a man who had let his family down. He saw a man whose life was rusting away from the inside out. The rust in the bucket. If you think of your money as a bucket, income is the water flowing in. We have spent a lot of time talking about how to stop the leaks, those small, silly expenses that drain your bucket. But debt is something different. Debt isn't just a hole in the bottom of the bucket. Debt is like rust. When rust gets into a metal bucket, it doesn't just sit there. It eats the metal. It makes existing holes bigger. It creates new holes where there were none before. Even if you pour more water in, the rust continues its work, turning the bucket into a useless piece of junk. This is what interest does to your life. Every day you carry a balance on a credit card or a high-interest loan, that rust is eating your future. It is taking the money you haven't even earned yet and giving it to someone else. For Silas in 1837, the rust was the interest on his business loans. For us today, it might be the 24% interest on a credit card used for a vacation 3 years ago. The feeling is the same. It is a heavy, physical weight on your chest. It is the reason you wake up at 3:00 a.m. with a racing heart. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, didn't have to deal with credit card companies, but he knew a lot about heavy burdens. He was the most powerful man in the world, yet he spent most of his life in muddy camps at the edge of the empire, fighting wars he didn't want to fight. He dealt with plagues, betrayals, and a shrinking treasury. He stayed calm by using a mental trick called the view from above. He would imagine himself floating high above the earth. From up there, his problems looked like tiny dots. He realized that his stress didn't come from the problems themselves, but from how he thought about them. When Silas was facing prison, and when we are facing a mountain of debt, the shame usually freezes us. We stop opening the mail. We stop looking at the bank account. We let the rust win because we are too afraid to look at it. The view from above tells us that the debt is just a number on a screen. It is a math problem, not a character flaw. Once Silas realized that his debt didn't make him a bad person, just a person in a bad spot, he could finally start to move. Sarah's midnight list Sarah Jenkins sat at her kitchen table in Austin, Texas, feeling very much like Silas. The blue light from her laptop was the only thing illuminating the room. It was nearly midnight, and the silence of her apartment felt heavy. On the screen was a spreadsheet she had been avoiding for 3 years. For a long time, Sarah told herself she was doing fine. She had a good job. She had a dog she loved. She wore nice clothes. But the view from above would have shown a different story. It would have shown a woman who was one car repair away from total disaster. She took a deep breath and started to type. She didn't just look at the total balance. She looked at the names of the monsters under her bed. Credit card 1, $1,200, $26% interest. Credit card 2, $4,500, $19% interest. Furniture loan, $800, $0% interest for 3 more months, then 29%. Student loan, $22,000, $5% interest. When she saw the total, her stomach did a somersault. It was almost $30,000. She felt that familiar urge to close the laptop, go to bed, and forget she ever saw it. She wanted to order something online just to feel the quick hit of joy that comes with a new package. But she remembered the story of the water American, Benjamin Franklin. She remembered that he didn't get rich by being lucky, he got rich by being honest with himself. Sarah realized that her promotion raise from a few months ago hadn't gone to her savings because the rust was eating it. She was paying hundreds of dollars every month just in interest. She was working 40 hours a week, but 5 of those hours were spent working for the bank, not for herself. She decided to try something different. Instead of trying to pay a little bit extra on everything, she chose one target. She looked at the smallest debt, the $800 furniture loan. She had $100 left over from her black coffee win earlier that week. Usually, she would have spread that $100 across all 4 debts. This time, she put the whole $100 toward the furniture loan. Then she set her bank to pay the minimum on everything else. As she clicked Submit Payment, something strange happened. The weight on her chest didn't go away, but it shifted. For the first time in years, she wasn't just reacting to her debt. She was attacking it. She had a plan. The 2 paths, Snowball vs. Avalanche. When you decide to clean the rust out of your bucket, you have to choose a method. There are 2 main ways to do this, and people have argued about which is better for a long time. The first way is called the debt avalanche. This is the path for people who love math. In an avalanche, you list your debts from the highest interest rate to the lowest. You ignore the balance size. You put every extra penny toward the debt with the highest interest because that is the debt that is costing you the most money. If Sarah used the avalanche, she would attack the $1,200 credit card first because it had a 26% interest rate. Mathematically, this is the fastest way to get out of debt. It saves you the most money in the long run because you kill the fastest growing rust first. The second way is called the debt snowball. This is the path for people who understand how humans actually work. In a snowball, you list your debts from the smallest balance to the largest. You ignore the interest rates. You put every extra penny toward the smallest debt first. Why would you do this? Why would you ignore a high interest rate just to pay off a small bill? Think about a real snowball. You start with a tiny handful of snow. You pack it tight, then you roll it. As it rolls, it picks up more snow. It gets bigger and faster, not because of the wind, but because of its own weight. Research from places like Northwestern University has shown that people who use the debt snowball are actually more likely to finish the journey. Why? Because humans are not calculators. We are emotional creatures. If Sarah tries to pay off her $22,000 student loan first because it's a big number, she might work for 2 years and still feel like she hasn't made a dent. She loses hope. She stops trying. But when Sarah pays off that $800 furniture loan in a few months, she gets a win. She sees one of the names on her list get crossed off. Her brain gets a hit of dopamine. She feels powerful. Now, the money she was paying on the furniture loan gets added to the payment for the next smallest debt. Her snowball is rolling. The power of the small win. In 1972, a scientist named Walter Mischel conducted a famous study called the marshmallow test. He put a child in a room with one marshmallow and told them, "I have to leave for a few minutes. If the marshmallow is still here when I get back, you can have 2. The kids who could wait, who could delay their gratification, tended to have better lives as they grew up. They had better jobs and less debt. But the test also showed something else. It is very hard to wait when you don't have a plan. The kids who succeeded often distracted themselves. They sang songs or looked away from the marshmallow. The debt snowball is a way of singing a song while you wait for your big wealth to grow. It gives you a series of small rewards that keep you focused. When Silas was in New York in 1837, he didn't have a spreadsheet, but he had a ledger. He realized he couldn't pay back the thousands he owed all at once. He started by going to his smallest creditors, the local baker, the guy who delivered the wood for his stove. He paid them first. By paying the small people back, he rebuilt his reputation. People started to say, "Silas is a man of his word. He's paying what he can." This gave him the emotional strength to keep going when the big banks came knocking. He realized that the rust was not just in his bucket, it was in his mind. The fear was paralyzing him. The small wins gave him back his movement. How to build your own snowball. If you're ready to start rolling your own snowball, you need to follow a very specific set of steps. This isn't about being good with numbers. It's about being good with your own habits. The deep audit, you must do what Sarah did. You have to list every single person or company you owe money to. Do not leave anything out. Include the pay later apps, the money you borrowed from your brother, and the credit card you hide in your sock drawer. Sort by size, ignore the interest rates for a moment. List them from the smallest total balance to the largest. Pay the minimums, you must keep the lights on. Pay the minimum required amount on every debt except the smallest one. If you miss a payment on a large debt, the fees will be like pouring gasoline on the rust. Attack the smallest. Every extra dollar you find, from selling old clothes, from drinking black coffee, or from a small bonus at work, goes to the debt at the top of your list. The rollover. This is the most important part. When the smallest debt is gone, do not spend that money. If you were paying $50 a month on a small credit card, and now it's gone, you take that $50 and add it to the payment of the next debt on the list. This is how Sarah began to change her life. She stopped looking at her $30,000 mountain. She started looking at her $800 molehill. Once the molehill was gone, she felt like she could climb anything. The ghost of the debtor's prison. We no longer have debtor's prisons like Silas feared. We don't lock people in cold rooms for owing money to a department store. But in some ways, modern debt is more dangerous because it is invisible. In the 1800s, everyone knew if you were in debt. It was a public shame. Today, you can be drowning in debt while posting photos of a fancy dinner on the internet. You can look like a success while being a slave to your mailbox. The rust of debt doesn't just eat your money, it eats your choices. It tells you that you can't quit a job you hate because you have a car payment. It tells you that you can't move to a new city because you owe too much on your credit cards. It turns your life into a cage. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that the best way to defend yourself against an enemy is to not become like them. The enemy in our modern world is the system that wants you to stay in debt. The banks want you to pay the minimum forever. The stores want you to buy things with money you don't have. When you start a debt snowball, you are declaring independence. You are saying that you will no longer be a leaking bucket. You are deciding that your future self deserves that money more than a billionaire banker does. Sarah's first victory 3 months after she sat at her table at midnight, Sarah crossed the first line off her list. The furniture loan was gone. She felt a physical lightness she hadn't felt in years. She didn't go out to celebrate with a big dinner. Instead, she took Cooper for a long walk in the park. She realized that the joy she used to get from buying things was nothing compared to the peace she felt from owning her own life. She looked at her list. The next debt was the $1,200 credit card. Because she had finished the furniture loan, she now had an extra $150 a month to put toward that card. The snowball was getting bigger. It was getting faster. She still had the student loan, she still had the big credit card, but the view from above showed her something new. It showed a path. She wasn't a financial drifter anymore. She was a woman with a map. The quiet landing. Silas eventually saved his shop. It took him years of living on bread and water, but he paid back every cent he owed. He never used credit again. When he died, he left a small fortune to his children, but more importantly, he left them a story about resilience. He showed them that you can always clean the rust if you are willing to pick up the brush. Debt is a heavy burden, but it is not a permanent one. It is a series of choices that have piled up over time. To get out, you simply have to start making a different series of choices, one small win at a time. The math of an avalanche might be faster, and the history of 1837 might be scary, but the reality of your life is lived in the small moments. It is lived in the $100 payment. It is lived in the decision to stay home instead of going out. The rust is tough, but you are tougher. Your bucket can be mended. The water can stay inside. You just have to be brave enough to look at the numbers, list them out, and start the snowball rolling. Once it starts, nothing can stop it. Chapter 6: Lifestyle Creep, The Silent We. The air in the small room in New Bedford, Massachusetts, felt heavy with the smell of old paper and whale oil. It was 1865, and the world outside was changing fast. But inside this room, time seemed to stand still. There were no velvet curtains hanging from the windows. No thick carpets covered the floorboards. Instead, there was a simple wooden desk, a hard chair, and a stack of black ledgers that held the secrets of a massive fortune. This was the world of Hetty Green. She had just inherited about $7.5 million after her father passed away. In today's money, that would be worth well over $100 million. Most people in her position would have immediately called for a carriage to take them to the finest dressmakers and architects. They would have built mansions with gold leaf ceilings and filled their stables with the fastest horses. They would have let their new wealth change every single thing about how they lived. Hetty did the opposite. She stayed exactly where she was. She wore the same dark dresses until they were threadbare. She ate simple meals, often warming up oatmeal on a radiator because she didn't want to pay for a stove. She lived in cheap boarding houses and moved frequently to avoid being noticed by tax collectors. This wasn't because she was poor. It was because she understood a secret that most people never learn. The fastest way to lose your freedom is to let your spending chase your income. The trap of the moving goalpost: most of us think that if we just earned a little more money, all our problems would vanish. We tell ourselves that a 10% raise or a year-end bonus would be the plug for our leaking bucket. But history shows us a different story. For most people, when the water coming into the bucket increases, the holes in the bottom simply get bigger. This is called lifestyle creep. It is the silent habit of increasing your standard of living every time your income goes up. It starts small. You get a small raise, so you start buying name brand cereal instead of the store brand. You get a promotion, so you trade in your perfectly good car for a newer model with a higher monthly payment. You move into a bigger apartment because you feel like you deserve it. The problem is that once you upgrade your life, it is very hard to go back. Your new, expensive life becomes your new normal. You don't feel any richer than you did before because your bank account still hits zero at the end of the month. You are just running faster on a treadmill that never stops. Hetty Green's husband, Edward Green, was a man who loved the treadmill. He was a wealthy man in his own right, but he loved the prestige of the high life. He spent money on fine clothes, expensive dinners, and fancy clubs. He allowed his lifestyle to creep until it eventually swallowed his fortune. While Hetty was busy turning her millions into hundreds of millions, Edward was slowly going broke. Hetty eventually realized that her husband's spending habits were a threat to the fortress she was building. She made the difficult choice to separate her finances from his. She refused to let his desire for luxury pull her into the trap. She chose radical stasis, the act of keeping her life simple even as her wealth grew to astronomical levels. She knew that every dollar she didn't spend on a fancy carriage was a seed she could plant in her garden to grow even more wealth. The hidden cost of deserving it, we often use the word deserve as a weapon against our own future. After a long week of hard work, it feels right to buy a new pair of shoes or go to an expensive dinner. We tell ourselves, I worked 40 hours for this, I deserve a treat. But when we do this with every extra dollar we earn, we are actually trading our future freedom for a moment of comfort. Think back to the compound garden. Every time you get a raise, you are handed a bag of seeds. You have two choices. You can eat the seeds today, or you can plant them. If you eat them, you get a quick snack, but you will have to work just as hard tomorrow to find more food. If you plant them, those seeds will eventually grow into a forest that provides food for you while you sleep. In the 1990s, a man named William Budd Post won $16.2 million in the Pennsylvania lottery. He was a man who had lived a very simple life, but the moment the money hit his account, the creep took over. He bought a twin-engine airplane, even though he didn't have a pilot's license. He bought a mansion. He bought businesses for his siblings. Within a single year, he was $1 million in debt. He later said that winning the lottery was the worst thing that ever happened to him. His story is extreme, but the lesson is universal. If you do not have a gate on your lifestyle, no amount of money will ever be enough. The holes in the bucket will always grow to match the flow of the water. The 50% rule. How to Gate Your Growth. Sarah Jenkins sat at her desk in Austin, Texas, staring at an email from her boss. She had just finished a huge marketing campaign, and the company was giving her a 5% bonus. It was several $1,000s, more than she usually saw in her account at one time. A few months ago, old Sarah would have already been on a website looking at a designer handbag she had wanted for years. She would have told herself that this was a reward for her hard work. She would have felt like she deserved to show off her success. But Sarah had been studying Hetty Green. She thought about Hetty sitting in that unheated office, focused only on the numbers. She realized that the handbag wouldn't actually make her life better. It would just be another thing she had to take care of. It would be a hole in her bucket. Sarah decided to use the 50% rule. This is a simple framework for handling any increase in income, whether it's a raise, a bonus, or a gift. Keep half. You take 50% of the new money and use it for your future. This goes directly toward paying off debt or into your savings and investments. Enjoy half. You take the other 50% and allow it to improve your current life. You can use it to go to a nice dinner, buy something you need, or upgrade a small part of your daily routine. By using this rule, Sarah was able to celebrate her win without destroying her progress. She put half of her bonus toward her smallest credit card balance, which felt like a huge weight lifting off her shoulders. With the other half, she bought a high-quality coffee maker for her kitchen. Now, she could enjoy a great cup of coffee every morning without spending $7 at the shop down the street. She didn't deny herself joy. She just made sure that her future self got a raise at the same time her present self did. The comparison trap. One of the biggest reasons our lifestyle creeps upward is that we are constantly looking at what everyone else is doing. In the late 1800s, people called this keeping up with the Joneses. Today, we see it every time we scroll through social media. We see a friend on a beach in Hawaii. We see a neighbor with a shiny new SUV in their driveway. We see a coworker with a brand new phone. Without even thinking about it, we feel like we are falling behind. We feel a pressure to spend money just to stay even with the people around us. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, wrote about this nearly 2,000 years ago. He noted that we often value the opinions of people we don't even like more than we value our own peace of mind. He practiced voluntary discomfort specifically to break this trap. He would spend days eating the simplest food and wearing the cheapest clothes, even though he was the most powerful man in the world. He did this to remind himself that his happiness didn't come from his stuff, but from his character. When you find yourself wanting to buy something just because someone else has it, ask yourself 2 questions. Would I still want this if I could never show it to anyone else? Is the temporary high of this purchase worth working another month of my life to pay for it? Most of the time, the answer is no. Most of the things we buy to impress others are just anchors that keep us tied to our jobs and our debts. The Secret Millionaires Next Door in the 1990s, 2 researchers named Thomas Stanley and William Danko spent years studying people with a net worth of over $1 million. They expected to find people living in mansions, drinking expensive wine, and wearing designer clothes. Instead, they found the millionaire next door. The average millionaire they interviewed lived in a modest neighborhood. They drove a used car that was several years old. They shopped at normal grocery stores and used coupons. They didn't look rich. The reason they were millionaires was that they had refused to let their lifestyle creep. While their neighbors were busy buying bigger houses and flashier cars to look wealthy, these people were busy becoming wealthy. They chose the sovereign saver path. They understood that money spent on a status symbol is money that can no longer work for you. Think about MC Hammer, the famous rapper from the early 1990s. At the height of his fame, he was earning $30 million a year. He lived in a $12 million mansion with a 200-person entourage. He had gold-plated gates and a staff that cost him $500,000 every month. He was earning more money than almost anyone on the planet, but his lifestyle creep was even faster. When his income eventually slowed down, the giant machine he had built crushed him. He went from $30 million to bankruptcy in just a few years. Compare him to Hetty Green. She didn't care what people thought of her black dress or her oatmeal. She didn't care that the newspapers called her the Witch of Wall Street. She cared about her independence. Because she never let her expenses grow, she was able to survive every market crash and every economic storm. She was the one who ended up lending money to the city of New York when the government ran out of cash. Creating your own ground floor, Hetty Green once said, "I believe in getting in on the ground floor and staying there." This is a powerful way to think about your money. Imagine your life is a building. Your ground floor is the basic amount of money you need to be happy, healthy, and safe. For Sarah, her ground floor included her rent, her dog Cooper's food, healthy groceries, and a few simple hobbies. Everything above that floor was optional. When she got her bonus, she realized she didn't need to move to the second floor or the third floor. She was already happy on the ground floor. By staying there, she could use all that extra space in her building to store wealth. Here are a few ways you can start building your own gate against lifestyle creep. The 48-hour rule. Before you buy anything that isn't a basic need, like food or medicine, wait 48 hours. Most of the time, the need to have it will disappear once the initial excitement wears off. Audit your subscriptions. Every few months, look at your bank statement. Are you still paying for that gym you don't visit or that streaming service you don't watch? These are small leaks that grow over time. Calculate the hours of life. Before you buy something, divide the price by how much you earn per hour. If a new pair of shoes costs $100 and you earn $20 an hour, ask yourself, is this pair of shoes worth 5 hours of my life sitting at my desk? Automate your savings. The best way to stop yourself from spending a raise is to never see it in your checking account. As soon as you get a raise, set up an automatic transfer to move that extra money into your savings or debt payments on the day you get paid. The joy of the enough point there is a deep, quiet joy that comes from knowing you have enough. When you stop chasing the next upgrade, the constant anxiety of needing more begins to fade. You start to realize that the best things in life, a walk with your dog, a good book, a conversation with a friend, don't cost very much at all. Sarah Jenkins felt this joy on a Sunday afternoon. She was sitting in her apartment, the one she used to think was too small. She looked at Cooper, who was napping in a patch of sunlight. She looked at her coffee maker, which was brewing a fresh pot. She thought about her credit card balance, which was lower than it had been in 5 years. She realized she didn't need a bigger apartment or a designer bag to feel successful. She was already successful because she was the master of her own money. She had stopped being a financial drifter who was pushed around by every trend and every advertisement. She was becoming a sovereign saver. Silent wealth killer of lifestyle creep only has power over you if you aren't paying attention. Once you see it for what it is, a treadmill that leads nowhere, you can choose to step off. You can choose to live a life that is rich in freedom rather than just rich in stuff. Building wealth isn't about how much you make. It's about how much you keep and how much of that keep you put to work. By keeping your life simple.